Hello everyone, this episode was recorded with two incredibly special guests for the University of Pennsylvania's annual Climate Week, which took place from October 13th to October 17th. This year's Climate Week theme, Hotspots, invites us to think about places and people under pressure, from melting glaciers and rising seas to the cultural and creative responses that emerge in the face of change. Welcome to 1.5 Degrees, the podcast where together we explore the science, solutions, and stories involved in the fight against climate change. I'm your host, Heidi Pan, speaking with the professionals behind the latest research, policies, culture, and innovations shaping our response to global environmental challenges. For today's episode, we are joined by Dr. Leigh Stearns, who is a glaciologist and professor in the Department of Earth and Environmental Science at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Stearns' research, combining field observations, satellite remote sensing, and numerical modeling, studies how the cryosphere, including ice sheets, glaciers, and more, in Greenland, Antarctica, and Alaska, are changing in response to climate warming, and what those changes mean for global sea levels and coastal communities. Dr. Simon Richter is the class of 1965 endowed professor of Germanic Studies at the University of Pennsylvania, and his work centers on how societies in Germany, Indonesia, the Netherlands, and the US respond to rising seas, subsidence, and other climate pressures, not just through infrastructure, but through stories, culture, and design, such as through his alter ego, Dr. Poltergeist, in Project Poltergeist, a series of accessible animated videos on complex climate adaptation challenges. As an environmental humanist, Simon also launched the Penn 1.5-minute climate lectures in 2019 and co-founded Climate Week at Penn in 2020. I hope you enjoy today's episode. This year's Penn Climate Week theme, it's hotspot. That can mean both physical places and points of tension or creativity. Dr. Stearns, your research focuses on literal climate hotspots like melting glaciers, while your work explores kind of cultural and imaginative ones. How do both of you define hotspot for yourself, and what does that kind of reveal about how people, experience the climate crisis?
So I'm an earth scientist, and from an earth science perspective, I think of hotspots in a physical sense as a localized area, often with a singular problem. And in that way, it's hard to translate to the climate problem, and it's hard to think of solutions because it's not local and it's not singular. If it was, it would be a lot easier for us to address. We can think of the whole earth as a hotspot in that sense because we're already being impacted by climate, but in different ways in different regions. And also that makes it challenging to frame it as a hotspot. It's nice to think of an issue as a hotspot because we hope that it garners more attention and focus for a thing. But one of the fascinating and complicated things about climate is that it's not local and the changes feel gradual and diffuse and interwoven. That complicates a lot of our solutions in that sense. Simon, you have a different perspective on it.
No, I wish I had a chance to speak to you when we were brainstorming what our theme would be. I came up with the idea for hotspots for this climate week, and I guess I was thinking that this was when the Trump administration expressed interest in buying Greenland, and I thought, whoa, Greenland is a political hotspot, right? And so I was thinking of it not in terms of a single focus, but as a place where a lot of things come together and become visible. This almost unbearable irony of the fact that we're calling Greenland, where we're dealing with a melting ice sheet, a hot spot when it's supposed to be cold and when it's seeing temperatures that are far above the norm and so on. And the fact that it's politically volatile, that seemed to me to be the epitome of a hot spot. And I just like the fact that it was both a literal thing and a metaphorical thing. It signaled that we were not afraid of confronting controversial subjects. We need to. But there's also a positive side to a hotspot, right? We could say a place is a hotspot where lots of things are happening, or where there is that kind of focus that means, let's say, solutions or technologies or policy get accelerated because it happens to be a hotspot.
It's true. Yeah. I think both definitions that you discussed make sense. Sometimes certain areas are kind of under prioritized or overlooked. We hone in on certain things and call certain things a hotspot. And Leigh said that the entire Earth right now is basically a hotspot because everything is not being affected. Still, though, there are political hotspots just because climate has been made into this political issue. I really wanted to kind of focus on, or maybe kind of create a hotspot in the work that you do, Leigh. You research the cryosphere. Can you explain what you do for work, what you do outside of it, and how did you become first interested in glaciers and the cryosphere in general?
Yeah, great question. And just to echo back to the hotspot question for a minute, I do think it is helpful to think of the climate issue in hotspot framing, because then
Sure.
we can galvanize towards an issue instead of being overwhelmed that it's too much, too big. It is big, but we have to pick at it in certain problems. So I think that framing does help. So I study why the cryosphere, the ice sphere, is changing, and that can take many ways. In particular, I focus on glaciers in Greenland, Alaska, Himalayas, Antarctica, why they're changing, how they might change in the future. So I use satellite imagery, field observations, numerical models, machine learning to try to understand how they're changing now so we can predict better in the future. I grew up in New York City, so not near any glaciers. Although near evidence of past glaciers. I loved science and being outside. I love geology and earth science, and that you can tell a story by looking at a landscape and have questions and think about these different timescales. And then, like many people, I had an inspirational undergrad. For me, it was undergrad, but I had a teacher who was a glaciologist and introduced me to that discipline, and more so the community. I really felt like I was networked with a community of glaciologists pretty early in my undergrad career. I wanted to work with these people, going to great places and doing really interesting research. And that's how I kind of got wrapped up in it.
Dr. Richter, how did you get wrapped up into climate storytelling and environmental humanities? As an environmental humanist, can you tell us more about what that means as well?
Right. Yeah. So I was trained as an 18th century literature specialist, a German 18th century literature specialist. And so my route to climate change and climate action was long and circuitous. It basically started, I think, in 2011 or 12, which is relatively late, but that's because up until that point, like most people, I think, I just assumed, had a vague sense of what climate change was. And if it was important, I figured governments would do something about it. That just seemed reasonable. And then in 2011, 2012, I was the academic director of Penn's exchange program in Berlin. And I thought I would take that opportunity to understand two things. Why were Germans so positive about the energy transition at a very early stage? And why did Germany have a viable Green Party that had already been in government? I actually was in Germany in the 1983 when the Green Party for the first time was elected into parliament, and that was quite remarkable. And so I wanted to understand those two things, and I assumed that there were cultural reasons for that. I taught a seminar of or cultural history of the environmental movement in Germany, and as I got into that deeper and deeper, I realized that I had to understand what role climate change played in all of this. And when I did that, basically I was shocked and really scared, and also very, very concerned about my two sons, who at that point were like 10 and 8 years old, or 11 and 9 years old. Increasingly from that point on, I just resolved that I would do everything I could, in my teaching, my research, and my service to begin with the premise of climate change.
Yeah, I mean, it resonates in the sense that, yeah, I remember first learning about climate change and having that kind of emotional response to it as well. And I kind of wanted to ask about, that kind of somewhat ties into how you've been presenting climate in your storytelling or your projects. Sometimes there's honestly some humor that's involved, like you've worked with a comedian to create a documentary. You also have a project called Dr. Poltergeist. How did that persona kind of come into being? What was the motive for that alter ego that, in storytelling, public engagement, or I guess provocation, how does that kind of lens help you tell stories in a way that, you yourself, Simon Richter, might not be able to do?
Right. Yeah. So when Simon Richter is speaking, he tends to get into missionary mode. And, that works for some people, but it definitely turns off a lot of people as well. I get really animated in a different sense, just really agitated and get louder and louder and so on. In order to, to get past, sort of the barriers and defenses that people have erected, often it has to do with inattention and unwillingness to go there and so on. And that means both my team, the Poltergeist team or the Penn Animation as Research Lab team, as well as, people I've worked with, in one case, a comedian in the Netherlands by the name of Patrick Nederkorn. We find that humor is really disarming. There's a way in which there's authenticity to it. Like it's not just being playful for the sake of being playful. It's serious and it's urgent. But if you can find a funny, humorous way, also a sort of almost self-critical way, that's especially true for the comedian Patrick.
Mm.
He does this, sort of, he's not making fun of other people. He's making fun of himself so that people can project onto him or can go take
Mhm.
that journey with him, and wind up in a place where they otherwise wouldn't have gone. So I would say humor is not the only way by any means, but it is an effective way to address things that people are uncomfortable talking about.
Definitely, climate can be uncomfortable, and if not for, I guess methods like humor, it's something that you want to stray away from. So I find that your approach is super important, and communication is really about connection. And Penn Climate Week is emphasizing connecting science with action. So my next question is for Dr. Stearns. How do you translate, your glaciological findings, which can often be super highly technical, data heavy, into insights that can really be accessible to policymakers or communities, especially those kind of further from polar regions, but that are still vulnerable to issues such as sea level rise that are related to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it really kind of depends on the community and the issue. Climate touches so many issues that it's usually not hard to find the link that might resonate in that setting. And so, for me, in terms of translating the science, I like all scientists, hopefully, I focus on being honest about what we're certain about, what we're uncertain about, speaking knowledgeably about the science writ large, but staying specifically in my lane. I can talk about climate science, many aspects of it, but if somebody is asking me a detailed question about something that's outside of my direct purview, I don't want to overstate my certainty on that because that does damage in the long run. And people are smart and understands that we all have a certain focus. And I think it resonates better communicating our field to know those bounds. I was trying to think of an example of this in particular. Lately, a lot of attention has been paid in my field to glacier geoengineering, which is how are we going to stop glaciers, particularly in Antarctica and Greenland, from moving quickly so that they're not raising sea level. The ways that are being proposed are not scientifically sound right now or not efficient. And trying to put aside my emotion about the cause and actually focusing on the science actually did take some work and like talking to colleagues. It would be easy for me to just be flat out dismissive of these efforts because it's really clear that what we need to do is reduce our emissions. That's the singular thing we need to do, and everything else I see as a distraction to that mission. It's more fun to invent tech to solve things and to think of these like innovative strategies, but really we just need to do the hard work on the boring thing of reducing emissions. That's hard and takes time and a lot of stubbornness. And so trying to separate, and I feel like my colleagues and I have done a good job with this of saying, okay, we're just going to focus on if this thing was successful, what would that look like? Would it do the thing? And leave away, put aside the emotional part for that lens. Doesn't mean, we're scientists, but we're also humans. We also have our emotional aspect of it, and there's a place for that. But in writing up a scientific document, we want to be scientific about it and say, this is why it won't work, and this is why, resources should be diverted elsewhere. And translating that in a clear scientific way for policy or for communities is really important. And then in terms of like connecting it to people who are not near polar regions, sea level rise impacts everybody. I moved from the University of Kansas, so translating sea level rise to a state that is not going to be impacted directly by sea level rise. I thought about this a fair amount, but it impacts shipping and it impacts how people are moving, from the coast inland to different areas. It impacts a lot of things. Even if that one cause isn't impacting your house directly, it's impacting humanity and people, but it's also impacting your economics and your existence, even if you're not the one whose house is destroyed. And I think drawing those connections, and most of us are empathetic people. We don't want people to be suffering, and recognizing, that putting those stories to light is a really important piece of it. And that's where Simon's work is really important in getting people to care across these different axes.
A thought occurred to me, climate displacement and climate migration affects people that, they themselves might not have to move, but people moving in, there's a whole bunch of systems and things that culturally have stayed the same for so long that are completely disrupted by climate that we have to think about. And yeah, I think it's a good point that you bring up, in the sense that a lot of the solutions that are sensationalized and focused on are just that kind of like sensationalism, and not necessarily. It's super important to also kind of draw attention to the fact that, you know, we have the most foundational things that we need to address first, emissions, before we address those kind of other solutions. But those other solutions are still simultaneously important.
Mhm.
I wanted to talk about kind of climate migration, and this was explored, Dr. Richter, in your piece, A New Piece of Munster. Is that how you pronounce it? How did you utilize humor, culture, performance, and just kind of prompting reflection or action on that issue, for example?
I'll try to tell you this as briefly as I can.
Yes.
Thank you for reminding me about that. So, the first piece of Minster was the piece that ended the war between the Dutch provinces and Spain in the 17th century and established the Kingdom of the Netherlands. It didn't or Republic of the Netherlands hadn't existed until that point. My friend Patrick and I, so this comedian and I, we were interested in thinking about relations between the Dutch and the Germans in a future where much of the Netherlands might be inundated. 26% of the Netherlands is below sea level. Another 34% of the Netherlands is low relative to the major river that is passing through that terrain. So that's 60% of the country that is sort of below a water level and therefore very vulnerable. They're fine right now, but it's a high stakes, gamble that they'll be able to continue to keep ahead of sea level rise and storm surges and other sorts of things. So we wanted to imagine, what would it be like if suddenly, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of Dutch had to leave low-lying areas and move towards the east and towards the German border. There are two reasons we wanted to do that. One is that there's quite a strong anti-migration sentiment in much of Europe, and also very much so in the Netherlands. And we thought, it might be helpful for them to imagine themselves as migrants and having to cross a border and hope for hospitality on the other side. And the other part was, most of the time when we talk about these scenarios, we're thinking about migrants who what are called climate refugees who are coming from the global south. And so we wanted to call attention to the fact that the global north is also vulnerable and hope that that might have some effect. What we did, let's see, Patrick had already a one-man show called The Orange Menace. The color of the Royal Dutch family is orange, that they wear when they play soccer. The subtitle was The Hollanders Are Coming. He plays this, he's a Dutch speaker, but he plays this in German. He played it in German theaters. And it was amazing to see how the German public responded to that. Essentially, he was making a plea kind of well in advance, but he would say, we understand that German bureaucracy works very slowly, so we want to sort of get our application in early. But for himself, his family, and millions of other Dutch people to see, will we be welcome here? And, and that was remarkable, because he did it, of course, with humor, but at the same time, there was a real kind of request there. And it was interesting to see, how did the German public respond? They were warm and receptive, thought he was very funny. They thought his accent was charming and so on. But I think they were also kind of struck by the fact that, yeah, this could happen. And then we organized a bunch of workshops with paired Dutch and German cities and towns and universities so that Dutch and German people could come together. And after being informed by scientists from both the Netherlands and Germany about the situation vis-a-vis migration, sea level rise, adaptation, etc., they met in working groups to work out the principles of a future peace, which involved a peace with each other, a peace with strangers, and a peace with nature, because nature, of course, also definitely, that war with nature needs to stop, and so on. And those workshops then, as well as the performance, formed the basis for the documentary that we made.
Yeah, no, it's a super powerful project, and I really do appreciate that kind of sort of literal sense of, like, you're bringing a future hypothetical into the present as a way of really, calling attention to an issue that most people are not thinking about or aren't trying to think about as much. But if we want to be prepared, this is the time to think about those things. Another project that you kind of initiated in 2019 was the 1.5 degrees climate lectures. And Dr. Stearns, you're going to be giving one of those during Climate Week. What message do you want students or any participant in your event to really take away about, be it glaciers, global systems, or, their kind of own agency in addressing, the climate crisis and all the issues that come with it?
Well, part of what I'll talk a little bit about kind of what I'm studying right now, which is how the Arctic is changing and how we need to be prepared for that. Well, one of the key message I'm trying to get across is that actually, it's an exciting time to work on climate issues, and it's not just depressing, and it's not just hard, and it's not just grim. It is those things at times, but it's relevant and it's important and it's motivating. And it's needed. So in my case, when I was a grad student 20 years ago, in terms of satellite imagery, I was lucky if I got one satellite image of the glacier I'm looking at in Greenland once a summer. And now I can get one every hour. And so that is a really exciting time to be looking at our Earth and looking at these changes. We have like amazing AI tools and data analytical tools now that we didn't have back then. And so it really is a perfect moment to be ramping up our understanding of Earth and our appreciation for it and our help in making it more resilient and helping communities be more resilient. But the barriers are annoying, and yeah, that's very frustrating. But the problem is like so important and impactful, and the tools are there. We often get mired in the doom and gloom of it and the defeatist nature of it. From a science perspective, it's very interesting. From a humanitarian perspective, it's really important. And so I hope people are kind of empowered to join the lens they think is important or resonates with them. Eventually, we're building AI tools specifically for earth science and climate science. Right now, we are stealing things from like what Facebook makes. Oh, they have this algorithm that does this. Maybe I can use that to do this thing in the Arctic. And we're fighting to get single year of grad student support. The things we're fighting for are so ridiculous. There's money in these fields, interest in these missions that I think we sometimes lose sight of that. Like climate should be this great unifier. We're all dealing with it. We're all thinking about it. We're all living it. And it's not, but it could be. If there's a way that like kind of excites people about this mission as opposed to depressing them or alienating them, I think that's a really important piece in this moment.
Both of you do communications work. We're also, professors at Penn. You navigate and meld together different fields. Same thing with you, Simon. How do you two bring that experience reconciling, be it, for example, field work, remote sensing analysis, data analysis, and then, Simon, you bridge humor and really tough subjects. Has that affected the way that you guys mentor students or collaborate on climate research between departments at Penn?
That's a great question.
Yes.
I mean, I think yes, it has. I mean, I think what we've realized that building the structure for more interdisciplinary work, I can focus very narrowly and specifically and have a very fulfilling career just on how glaciers are changing in Greenland. But we're at a point when we know they're changing and that they will continue to change. And the way we're living our lives hasn't changed that much. The impactful work is going to come from the storytelling and from the like values people have and how they want to live their lives. And it's more important to introduce them to how connected everything is. I teach a glaciers and climate class that I used to teach very much just the physics. This is the stress and strain of a glacier, and this is the dynamics, this is how you model it. Now it's more of this is the societal implication of not having glaciers in Austria or in India, and how they have to shift how they're using water and their cultural connections to ice. That's an important piece. That's not taking away from the physics of the ice, but I feel like that is more. There are going to be a few glaciologists that come out of my class here at Penn, but more people who have an appreciation, hopefully, for how connected our systems are.
Mhm. I think I'm going to highlight three things. One is that, in my experience, literature and film are great methods or media for thinking and feeling climate change, processing emotions of all kinds. Also, great for building a sense of community, which I think is very, very important for encountering climate change. The other thing I'll say is that I understand myself to be sort of an activationist. That's a modification of activist. What I
Mhm.
mean by that is that I think I motivate students and incentivize students to discover the broad world of climate action, not just reading about things, picking up about things on social media and so on, but finding your place, your niche in climate action, something that you can do that is positive, that is bigger than just your personal world. Penn and the city of Philadelphia offers so many opportunities for that. It's really not difficult. I curate a running list of activities that students can participate in, something they can attend, hands-on sort of stuff, other experiences, and so on. By the end of the semester, I will have curated some 50 events, and they only have to go to 5. They can definitely find one that works for them. And then the last thing I'll say is that in the work that we're doing in the Penn Animation as Research Lab, where we're working with students who are artists, we have been finding ways to give our students the experience of doing research on location that's related to climate and climate adaptation, and discovering animation is a crucial part of it, not just something that comes at the end of it, but that the whole process, the research process and the creative process, that they go side by side along the entire duration as we go back and forth between experts, as we, refine our story, work on our images, make sure that the drawings that we do, the ways that we represent things are accurate and effective, right? So the rhetorical aspect and the scientific aspect, they are side by side through that whole process. I would say it's all about realizing this isn't just theoretical. It's not book learning. This is something that really impacts your life. And there are so many ways to be involved.
No, I just wanted to take this time to also just let me just thank you both for the work that you do in this kind of space because, I think from a student's perspective, I'm the one in these classes. Students at Penn can learn from you these approaches. Climate is super scary, but there's also elements to, addressing it. And I really appreciate how you two highlight that. You guys both engage with students at Penn, but if you could engage with yourself as a student, if you could turn back time, butterfly effects aside, and tell your younger self something that you've learned from life so far, what would that be?
You want to go first, Simon, or you want me to go?
If you got something handy, I'm still
Yeah,
running
that's
through
that's a
some
great
ideas.
question.
Yeah.
I think for me, coming from the science perspective, just recognizing there's no singular way to be a good scientist. On my grades average in high school and college, I did okay. And, I started doing better when I found the field that I'm really interested in. Some scientists are going to be great at differential equations, and some are better at science communication, and some are better at numerical modeling. And some in my field are better at fixing a snowmobile at -10 degrees temperatures in the middle of Antarctica. All of those are very valuable. Science is really a team sport, and it's more fun when it's a team sport. This is why academia is so great. You get to pick who you work with, pick the area that you're in. I didn't get that sense when I was younger. I thought it was very much like you're scientists, you're on your own, you follow this very narrow path, but really there are many flavors of doing science, and kind of finding your own path is really um
Yeah. I'd say talk to strangers. Go through every open door and find meaning outside of yourself. Those are things I didn't necessarily do, but I have learned to do them later in life, and it has made such a difference, right? All of these things contribute to creating a community that is focused on, let's say, a goal, and therefore it's meaningful and productive, generative. It's not just self-serving and so on. And to experience that earlier in life, I think would be really, really great. I think I was missing doing it and discovering it made such a difference. Also, you have no idea where you will wind up. That's so important. Don't think you know where you're going to wind up. Be open for what may come, especially if you take, a few risks.
Thank you both so much. I really appreciate the time. And, I've learned so much from this. For people that want to continue to learn from you guys, keep up with the work that you do, where can they find you or follow what you're doing next?
Right. So because kind of experts I talk to a lot, the policymakers and so on, are all on LinkedIn, that's where I'm focused. So I'm extremely active on LinkedIn. Also, Poltergeist has a YouTube channel. Just look up Project Poltergeist on YouTube, and you'll find the 6 videos that we've made so far, and a 7th video about the island of Bonaire off the coast of Venezuela is in the works right now.
And for me, I mean, as a science communicator, this is one thing I need to do better at. But I'm on Blue Sky, Leigh Stearns, and my website. Or if you have questions or interests, just send me an email.
Everything will be in the description. Thank you both so much again. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you, Heidi.